bizarre, the weird, and the supernatural.
Well, for decades, only crackpots and crazy people believed in UFOs. That's what I thought anyway. And then in recent years, it turns out that governments have been taking them seriously all along. Very seriously.
People in Alert Bay say they've been hearing strange screams and howls from the forest at night. And the legend of the Sasquatch runs deep in their First Nations culture.
Join us as we talk all things paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, myths, legends. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the next hour listening to Project WAPR.
In the beginning of the podcast revolution, one podcast stood out above the rest. Project WAPR. Launched by Gary Anderson, this podcast focused on those subjects and topics frowned upon by the mainstream, topics such as the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, and cryptids. Later on, Gary launched the Paranormal Biker podcast, which very quickly became the Paranormal Bikers podcast when Jeremy joined the team. After many episodes of this podcast, Gary wanted to create a more mainstream podcast, and with Fernando joining the on-air team, Gary launched a fully reinvented podcast called The Shadow Files. Over the years of The Shadow Files and Paranormal Bikers podcasts, the team has interviewed some very interesting and well-known people on the show. In this video, we will look back at some of the memorable moments and interesting personalities that has made The Shadow Files podcast the great success it has become. Sit back, relax, put your headphones in and enjoy this trip back through The Shadow Files archives. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified when every new video is released on the channel.
That's it, we're live now. We are live. My name is Gary. I'm Jeremy. And we are the Paranormal Bikers. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the Paranormal Bikers. You've got Jeremy and myself here for another hour of paranormal fun. How are things with you, mate?
Not bad. Been a bit busy with work, but slowly getting there.
Yeah. Well, we're doing something a little bit different tonight. We're not in the same room like we usually are when we record. We're actually probably an hour's drive apart. Yeah, social distancing. Yes, significant social distancing, I might add. So Tonight is all about our recent Albany trip that we did. We may have discussed it previously, and if you're a follower on our WAPR page, you will certainly know all about it.
Is there anyone else here?
You've got code 2.
What the hell was that? Who opened that?
No one. Can you see anybody there? Oh,
You've got code 2.
What the hell was that? Who opened that?
no one. Can you see anybody there?
You did open the door. Oh shit. Oh shit. Now can you close it for I've got chills.
So do I. I've got chills.
Oh god. Oh.
Now can you close it?
Come on, close it like you've done for us before. Oh.
Okay, today we're here with Steve Bassett. If you would like to explain to everybody what you do and about what you do.
I'm the executive director of the Paradigm Research Group, which was established in 1996 in just outside of Washington, D.C. for one purpose and one purpose only, to politically engage and hopefully eventually resolve the UFO ET issue. Not once and for all, but at least the current status quo.
Get it out.
And by resolve the issue is meant to change a government policy that the United States formulated and instigated back in the late 1940s, early 1950s, with the assistance of their allies after the war. Right, we were very popular in the U.S. To essentially sequester or embargo the acknowledgement of an extraterrestrial presence, which they never was engaging in. And this embargo was maintained throughout the Cold War for some fairly good reasons. I mean, it's hard to argue with their logic, given how frightening the Cold War was and what was at stake. But after the Cold War ended, it was time to move on, but it hasn't happened yet. And so a movement has been developing to finally end that truth embargo and reveal to the world, reveal to the citizens of nations that, in fact, they're not alone in the universe.
How do you feel everything would go if it was to come out tonight? I know it's a big ask, but how do you think the world would react?
We had a war called Civil War in the U.S. Back in the 1800s. Lasted about 5 years. It was a big deal, no question about it. And I think something like 60,000 books now have been written about the American Civil War. It's likely several 100,000 books will be written about the disclosure event and what comes after it. Certainly the year or two following it. Because the disclosure event will be, by quite a good margin, the most profound event in human history.
What do you think of that?
It's very in-depth and it's very enlightening, and it's actually very frightening that the government hides as much as they do.
Yeah, I actually found that video not long ago in my collection, and I watched it back. And you got to remember, I actually think I said 2009. I may have been wrong. It might have been 2010 when I actually sat down with Steve and we did that interview. I apologise for that crow. It was annoying on the day. We had somebody outside shooing it around, and it just kept coming back. But you look at some of the things that he had to say, and you look at what's going on with the world right now, he couldn't have been more bang on with a lot of it. You know,
He's hit a nail right on the head.
Yeah, several nails on the head.
Multiple things, even without the whole, I'm the first country to release this information on extraterrestrials. America's kind of put their foot in it anyway, and it's gone the way it's gone without even having anyone else to release that information.
Well, yeah, this is one of the things that I said. I've reached out to Steve to see if we can do a follow-up interview, because I'll send him that so he can see what happened then and then see where we are now, because one of the questions that I put to him is, what do you think this disclosure event would actually look like? And because obviously there were bits that weren't included in the video. And he said there may not be a definitive moment. It's just going to be a series of moments that lead to an inevitable outcome.
Which it is.
Sorry?
Which it is. It's already happening.
Well, that's what he said. He said it already started back then in 2010. And I went through talking about movies, and are they a way of bringing the subject up in a more light-hearted way? But it puts it at everybody's fingertips. It's there, and it puts it in their mind. And then little bits of news that come out, and I said, would that be a way of easing people into it? And you heard some of what he talked about. You know, I mentioned District 9, I think, and he said, not if you're going about a specific movie, but if you're talking about a genre as a whole. I mean, I think it wasn't long after that when the first Independence Day film came out, and I don't think they're necessarily the sort of films that you want, but what's interesting... Yeah, go on.
You can see it as Hollywood's been conditioning people for decades.
That's right. It began over 40 years ago now, 1979. I was a journalist to start off with, and I was got a job as the editor of a magazine that investigated the paranormal. There was a few about at that time. I suppose the nearest equivalent to in Australia that it would be like is New Dawn magazine.
Yep.
That's a paranormal magazine. It was that kind of thing. And I was the editor. I'd always had an interest in the paranormal and the unexplained, but I wasn't any person that was involved particularly in research or anything like that. But this really got me hooked, because at first I was thinking, wow, there's loads of people out there. They're just either delusions, they're making this up so they get some attention, or they're doing it for the money. And so that kind of was my thought. So when we would go along, or people would come back that were working for the magazine with reports and interviews with people who had seen or claimed to have heard weird things, I was saying, yeah, what's the motive? But I thought, well, it goes in the magazine anyway. But we had to have some sort of standard. So I would need more than one witness usually. And that's the way I went about it. And then, I was the skeptical one who was saying that somebody who claimed to have heard footsteps somewhere off in the house in the middle of the night when they were alone, it's a bit much, come on. But what was to happen to me and the people I knew at that magazine offices within a few months of the magazine launching was to literally blow anyone's mind. It started with an investigation we were conducting, just a completely normal routine investigation. But we didn't just do paranormal stuff, we did sort of historical mysteries as well, legends, that sort of thing. And one of the legends that we're investigating was that the British Queen Mary Queen of Scots in the 1500s, Shakespeare's time, Mary Queen of Scots was said to have possessed a ring with a green stone on it that held some sort of miraculous paranormal powers. It could cause strange things to happen. She was executed in the 1580s. This ring vanished, and the guy that was, nobody knew what happened to it. The guy that had her executed on behalf of Queen Elizabeth really wanted this stone for himself, a guy called Walsingham. And he searched the quarters that she'd been housed in. He interrogated people she'd known and couldn't find anything about this stone. And it had vanished. The story grew up, or the legend, that one of her supporters, she was a Catholic monarch in Scotland. She fled to England when there'd been an uprising there. Elizabeth had been Protestant, and eventually it led to her being executed for being a Catholic. She had Catholic followers in England. One of these characters was a man called Humphrey Packington, who lived in a stately manor at a place called Harvington, not far from Birmingham in the centre of England. And the legend grew up that he, because he'd visited her when she was in prison before her death, she had given him the job of making sure this stone was hidden somewhere, and that a series of clues were left behind to lead further generations to discover where it was. And he had lived at this place, Harvington Hall, which is now open to the public. I went there with a guy called Andy Collins, who he was working for the magazine at the time, and he was one of the main reporters, if you like. We went to this place, and they said, "Oh yes, the legend is that Humphrey Packington hid this stone somewhere in this area, and that he left a series of clues as to where it was that were hidden somewhere in the house." And I said, "That's brilliant. It's a great story. We can use this for the magazine.
Yeah.
You know, we'll look for the clues." They said, "Well, I think they've already been found just recently, and not long before we went there. These there've been renovations to the building, and then in the upstairs corridor, plaster had been removed from the wall to reveal all these paintings that had been basically bricked up for centuries, and they'd been there since the early 1600s, Humphrey Packington's time, and they were faded, but you could still tell what they showed. They showed characters known as the Nine Worthies. That's 9 heroic characters from biblical, mythological, or historical tales. The central figure was a figure of King Arthur wielding the magic sword Excalibur. And they said, these must be the clues that had been spoken about in the legend. And so if this greenstone was hidden anywhere, then these particular murals on the wall might be the clues to where they were. Up until then, the whole investigation had been completely and absolutely straightforward, just historical. An interesting story. If we could solve these clues, great. But nothing mystical had happened until suddenly, after myself and Andrew Collins, who incidentally is also an author of historical mysteries, and some people might know him, Andrew Collins, so this is both of us. We were the only 2 people that knew that we were investigating this case of the Greenstone. And when we returned to the offices of the magazine, we're in an old Victorian house in Wolverhampton, which is another central England city. When we returned to the office, somebody said, you've just had a phone call from a man called Alan Beard. Now, we knew that Alan Beard, he was a friend of somebody who was one of the journalists who worked for the magazine. Had a call from Alan Beard, who said he thinks you ought to know he fell asleep in his armchair, or while he was at work, or I can't remember where he was, but he'd fallen asleep and had this vivid dream about a green stone that we should be looking for, and that he should tell us.
Wow.
We thought, how did he know we were looking for a green? Even the person who took the message didn't know this. And I began to think, well, unless it's a really weird coincidence, he might be winding us up, and he's been following us around, or is he trying to get one over on us, and to see if he's a wind up? So I I spoke to him, and he said he just saw this green stone. He said that was set in an old silver ring, which is what this story of Mary Queen of Scots was all about, and that he thought we ought to search for it. He said, but he had another part of his dream. He saw this sword, and a voice told him, I suppose it's just like a voice in his mind in this dream, that first we must find this sword, which would in turn lead us to the stone. He said, so remember the sword. That's what I have to tell you. I said, what time did you get this dream? He said, he worked as as a lineman, fixing, lines on telephones that go across the countryside. So he said he'd fallen asleep at work at 3 o'clock. Was he hanging up some telegraph post somewhere? I was meant to ask him this. Anyway,
that might not have ended well.
At work. I assume he was having a break or something. And that was at like 3 o'clock or 3:10 or whatever. That was exactly the time we'd first seen this mural depicting this King Arthur with his sword Excalibur. The sword, the central image to this mural. And he'd mentioned this sword, and I thought, he can't have known this. There's something going on here, if it's telepathy at the very least. And basically, this must have been before we went back there the next time, and that must have been within the next 24 hours. There was a lady that we'd investigated called Marion Sunderland, because we'd interviewed her at one point not too long before, because her daughter had seen a UFO, and she basically had seen it flying off too or something. I don't know. Anyway, so we knew of this lady. She suddenly phones up the magazine and said that she'd fallen asleep while watching TV. Everyone's fallen asleep all over the place. She'd fallen asleep while watching TV and had a dream that we were looking. She didn't mention a green stone. She said, "Are you looking for a sword?" We thought, well, we are now. And she said, "The sword, you have to find this to lead you to something else. And when you find it, there will be a strange smell of rotting vegetation." And she said that there's water nearby. And Alan Beard had said that when we find the sword, there'd be a holly bush right next to it. So it was all fun. There's no way Alan Beard knew Marion Sunderland. In those days, there was no such thing as the internet, Facebook, mobile phones, anything like this. I mean, she lived like 100 miles from Alan Beard. I mean, there's no way they would have known each other unless it was a deliberately very well-conceived hoax. And how would they know what we were doing anyway? So, with me and Andy thought, right, we're going to go back to Harvington Hall. There's clearly something about this mural, even if it's just fate or synchronicities or telepathy or whatever helping us along here with these people's visions. This mural may very well lead to where the green stone was hidden. So eventually, which is cutting a very long story short, this image of King Arthur in this mural, behind him there's a hill depicted with his knights gathered on it. And within a couple of miles of Harvington Hall, where this was, there was a hill marked on the map called Knights Hill, Knights of the Round Table on this hill. We thought that could be referring to that place. When we discovered that right at the bottom of this Knights Hill, there were two lakes joined by a little stream over which was an old stone bridge, known locally as Arthur's Bridge. We thought, this has got to be it. This is what these murals are leading to. Anybody who knew they were trying to search for something, and realized that these murals depicted clues to lead to, would clearly eventually work out that Arthur's Bridge at the bottom of Knights Hill would have something to do with it. So we went to Knights. Well, I mean, Andy and I were so thrilled and excited by all this. We just went off there. I mean, it was winter time, so we were there at sort of in the dark, freezing cold, not the right kind of clothing for that sort of be outdoors at night at all. And we thought, what's here? So by torchlight, we went up to where the bridge was, and we stood on the bridge, and we were thinking, we'd very quickly managed to go into a local library before it had closed and found that the bridge did date from the 1500s. So it was there in Humphrey Packington's time. So we were thinking, this could be where something's hidden, but if so, where? We can't pull a bridge apart. But the figure of Arthur in the painting mural, he's actually holding his sword like this, and he's looking down, and to his left and the hill with the knights on is behind him, and the sword is pointing in that direction too. If you were to stand on the bridge with the Knight's Hill behind you and look down and to your left, you'll be looking into the foundations of the bridge on the side overlooking the larger of the two lakes. Andy just suggested, well, I reckon it's behind one of the stones on that side. But which one? Well, the only number that had been alluded to was the number 9, as in the 9 Worthies, which was the name of the painting.
Yep.
9 across, 9 down. If we did 9 across, 9 up, you'd be at the top of the bridge, and that would basically be too high up.
Yeah.
But if you went 9 across and 9 down, that would put it in a fairly safe place if you could get it behind the stones. So we went down there, not really expecting to find anything, until Andy said to me, "Can you smell that weird, horrible smell of, vegetation or whatever?" He said, "Marion said when you find the sword, you'll get that smell." I thought, "Oh yeah." And she said it was by water. We were understanding water to get to where this was. And the other thing was, right above it, where we had come to on the wall, 9 across, 9 down, was this holly bush. Alan Beard had said a holly bush stood there. So we were really excited. Eventually, we managed to remove the stone 9 across, 9 down by, cutting around it, and eventually we got this big stone out. And it clearly hadn't been touched for years. It was overgrown with vegetation and brambles, and there was moss on it, and we had to really fiddle around to get this thing out. When we did, we were absolutely gobsmacked, because behind this stone, there was this little ledge. And on the ledge was clearly what was either a long dagger or a short sword. And we thought, oh my God.
And so that's what I thought was going on. People were moving into the house, and the neighbors were telling them that it was a haunted house. And now everything that goes bump in the night is a ghost, and they get scared and move on. That's what I thought. But one weekend, we were up there, and it was a Saturday, and it was the middle of the day in the summertime. It was hot as hell. And this house, we had not put central heat and air in. We just had a couple of air conditioner window units, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there wasn't a window unit in the bathroom. It was hot, so we'd leave the door open so the air conditioning could go into the bathroom as well. But anyway, I had been ripping carpet up out of a bathroom. Don't ask me why anybody would carpet a bathroom if they had.
I mean, I'm jotting down questions for you right now.
I was ripping funky carpet out of this little bathroom in the heat, and I was just pouring up sweat and just nasty. And I gave up for the day. I said, that's it, I've had it. And I went back to the house, and at the time, I had been on a diet, and I had lost 15 pounds, and I was very proud of it.
Okay.
And so I went in the bedroom, and I'm getting undressed to take a shower. And my husband had already given up, and he was in the bedroom sitting in an easy chair on his laptop. And he said, looking good, as I was getting undressed. And I said, well, thank you. And I went on and got in the shower. And I turned the shower on, and I'm just standing there in the water, just cooling down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a cheap Walmart shower curtain up that you can kind of see through it, but you can't see clearly through it.
I got
the
you.
kind I'm talking about, cheap.
Yeah.
And my husband comes out of the bedroom, and he stands in the doorway of the bathroom, and he says, looking good. And I said, well, thank you again. And we spoke. We had a few, sentences back and forth, and he turned and left in the other direction from what he came from. And it was less than a minute. It was probably like 30 seconds later. Here he comes from the bedroom again and stands in the doorway. And I said, how did you get back in the bedroom? He said, I've been in the bedroom. Who were you talking to? And I was like, oh my God.
I just got goosebumps then.
Wow, that was a good one.
That was on my ghost story. I mean, that's the one that got me on my ghost story, which is a TV show over here. I don't know if y'all get it. Well,
No,
New York
not
would.
here.
Yeah.
No.
Well, really, I don't know.
So, was it disappointing that it wasn't your husband?
Well, you know what? There's more to the story. There's more to the story. So we got on my ghost story. I got on with Jimmy Billman, who had an investigating team at the time, and he had spent the night in the house by himself. And he had taped it, and he had sent off a demo tape to my ghost story, and they had agreed to have us on. And they came out to do what they call a B-roll, which is footage that they could use in the show.
Okay.
But we didn't do any real talking, I don't think. Anyway, he started describing a ghost that he had seen the night he spent the night at the house by himself. And he sounded familiar to me, just the way he would stand, and there was characteristics about him. I said, hold on a minute. I've got some pictures back in the back room. Now, my late husband, who died in 1996, I think it was 1996. Now I don't remember, and I'm going to get yelled at about that. Anyway, he was
safe with us and our viewers.
Right.
Yeah.
He was a Marine in Vietnam. Okay. And after the war, he was in the reserves. And I don't know if you know military people, but they kind of tend to run together.
Yeah.
They kind of have packs, you know. Yeah. If you've got a picture of one of them, you've got a picture of 5 of them.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was. I had pictures of my late husband along with other people. Mm-hmm. So I brought out about 6 or 7 pictures, and I said, do you see the man that you saw? Do you see him in any of these pictures? And he pointed straight to my late husband.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay. So my late husband
still visiting,
does hang out here occasionally. And it was him that had probably had the conversation with me in the shower. Oh. Not my husband, but my late husband.
Before you got involved with the show, what was probably one of the scariest cases that you've ever actually dealt with, or most intense?
Well, I was a lot greener behind the ear back in the day, and I do remember one particular case, and it didn't last too long because we had often been told that there was it was an old house in my hometown in which back in the day there was this event that occurred. Guys broke into the house, child started to cry, they drowned the child in the well outside, and there was this story that developed around that when you seen the candle lit in the window, that it meant that the child was home, and the child, this energy of the child was filled with revenge and everything else. And I can remember arriving there with there must have been about 7 or 8 of us, and we started walking down this lane. And bear in mind, this lane is covered on both sides by huge ash trees. And the light of the moon, it was having very little effect on the darkness within this lane. And as we came alongside of this old ruin of the house, I happened to look up, and as true as I sit here, there was a light in the window.
And
I never stopped. I turned that fast. I was heading back up that lane again at warp speed, and I remember one of the girls had grabbed my jacket and tore the jacket right off my back. I never stopped. I kept going.
Well, I was going to ask.
That was one of the most scariest things to start with. At the beginning, whenever LEP was running well, and there were English landlords who owned the castle at that time. They had gone to, it was London or Dublin, I can't remember which one it was, but while they were out, it was customary if someone came to your door back in the day that if they needed shelter and a roof over their head, you give them shelter. But it turned out that the rap come to the door and the butler looked out the window and he said, "Yeah, what's up?" And they said, "We need shelter for the night." And he came down and opened the door. Now, it turned out that it was the IRB, Irish Republican Brotherhood. And they said, we're here to burn the castle. And so the butler, he was able to get some of the furniture out, and they said they torched the place. Now, the oldest part of the castle is built around, I think, the 12th century. And that's the bit that they couldn't get rid of. Both wings were up in flames at this stage, but they couldn't get rid of the castle. So they decided they were going to go into the basement and lace it with TNT. And they would have blown it to smithereens had they not found the wine. So they got absolutely pissed out of their heads, and they were afraid to light the fuse, and they left it. That's why Lap is still there today, because the guys get drunk.
Oh my god!
But on another note is that some of the furniture that was taken was taken and ended up in some of the locals' houses, and we're aware that phenomena followed that furniture to their houses and started terrible hauntings there as well. I'll give you one example of how we succeeded in thinking outside of the box. When we make plans to investigate a particular area, the phenomena is well aware of what you're about to do, and so I had to be smart in that. And we went to Wolfschanze, which was Hitler's forward command post on the Eastern Front, and this was a huge Nazi complex in Poland. Huge big bunkers, concrete bunkers everywhere. The place was filled with tunnels and everything else, and we had full access. And in fact, I remember one night we were driving around in a half-track tank, which was a great experience, through Hitler's backyard. But this was the first place, we had been to Argentina, we were looking for Hitler and everything else, but Hitler was never in Argentina. And I said, this is going to be our time. This is the chance that we have. And I'm an avid photographer at night, especially at night. I love the beauty of the universe beaming down on this little planet, and such pleasure to see at night when you open the shutter of the camera and just leave it open and let it absorb the light. But when we went to Wolfschanze, I threw the camera over my back and we left the SS bunker that we were staying in, and headed into the depths of this Nazi base. I got about 10 feet from the bunker and I stopped and went, nope. And I turned and went back. It's just a place that best leaving well enough alone. So during the investigation that particular night, we rolled in. I told the camera people where they were going to be. I need you there, there, there. We need sound here, here, and here. You're going to stay out of our way. And Paul was with me. And I said, Paul, we need this equipment, that equipment, and that equipment. No one had any idea what I was about to do. The only person who had it was me, and it was in here. And I had it locked away in a box. Mm-hmm. And the moment that the switch was flicked, the hair, everyone that was there, the hair rose on their arms. They knew we have just opened the door. And Paul was looking at me and he was going, what the hell? And he heard the footsteps coming into the bunker. And as this music was playing, it really drove it home. And at that particular moment, we knew this is Hitler.
Fast forward about 15 years, I was 18 years old, just a couple of months out of high school, actually. I actually put my high school picture up in my program just to show people that's what I looked like when I met the Warrens. And my girlfriend, who is my wife now of almost 33 years, said, hey, you know, we were just newly dating. She's like, she saw in the local newspaper that the Warrens are going to be lecturing the next town over. I think it was a Friday night in September. And so I said, yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. Now, I had heard of Ed and Lorraine Warren. I'd seen him on television and heard him on the radio, but I'd never met them in person. So as fate would have it, we go there. Lorraine is at the table, you know, selling tickets for the event, talking to people. She was such a sweetheart. And she looks at me and she cocks her head to the side. I remember the look on her face. It's that look you give someone who's like, I know this person. I just can't place the name, or I can't place where I know this person. And she's looking at me. She says, honey, have we met before? And I said, no, Lorraine. And I said, I've heard a lot about you folks. I'm very excited to be here tonight and meet you. And she's looking at me. She goes, there's something about your aura. She was reading my aura, you know, that supernatural glow that emanates from all of us.
Yes.
And she had that ability to read auras. And she goes, there's a reason why you're here tonight. She said, make sure you see Ed and I after the show.
Wow.
So I was very excited and said, okay, no worries. So we went through the program and the show ended and Ed's packing up with Tony. He's like, come on, let's get out of here, Lorraine. I'm hungry. You know, they used to go out to a diner every time they did an investigation or a lecture. And they'd regroup at the diner, have a bite to eat, and we would talk about the cases. And from the looks of me, I've had a few cases. So we go to the diner, and she's sitting across from me, holding my hands. My wife's to my left, Ed's across from her. And she said, honey, what I'm doing is I'm looking at your aura, and I can tell from your aura that you were meant to do this work. She said, would you like to come and work with Ed and I? And I'm like, oh, yeah. You know, I mean, I didn't skip a beat. So that's how I met them originally. And I was invited into, and they took me in their embrace and basically took me in as family. And that's why I tell everybody, I said, they were, you know, people are like, well, what were they like? I said, as people, I said, they were just like grandparents to me. Wow. And the funny thing is that my wife and I are at the age now, just almost exactly, that the Warrens were when I met them. There's a famous quote that I use by President Ronald Reagan. It says, he said one day, and I never forgot this, he said, you know, it's not enough to be equal in the eyes of God. We need to be equal in the eyes of one another.
Exactly. Yep.
And unfortunately, I don't think that'll ever happen.
No.
But, you know, I live by the golden rule. I try to treat people as I would want to be treated.
Yep.
You know, and if there was more of that in this world, it'd be a happier place, I'm sure. A lot less aggression and fighting. But, you know, the way I view things is, look, we're all brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
You know, we all come from the same creator. At least that's my belief anyway. You know, we all come from the same creator, and we're all related in some way, shape, or form, regardless of your race, creed, color. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know.
All right. So let's jump to cases, right? Take out of the conversation the big name cases that everybody knows. They've made movies about them and things like that.
Yeah.
When you've gone out with first part of the question, when you've gone out with Ed and Lorraine Warren, what is the most memorable case that you've been on with them which hasn't made it to Hollywood? And then the next part of the question is, obviously, we don't want to base the whole episode on Ed and Lorraine Warren because it's about you. A lot has happened when you've gone out on your own, and what have you found case-wise that has been very interesting, and then something will have happened that you've gone, that's exactly what I was taught by my mentors, and that brings you back to the whole, yes, there's a lot to this.
That one.
Yeah, well, I mean, to think back, there's many cases, and they were so long ago. But there was this one case that Ed called me one day, and he's like, "Hey kid, you got your equipment ready?" I'm like, "Yeah, what's up?" And it said there's a case. He goes, there was this case in, I believe it was Shelton, Connecticut, Seymour or Shelton. It started with an S. I'm going back, 30 plus years probably. And the woman, it was an elderly woman that lived alone. Elderly, she was probably in her mid 70s. So that's not elderly to me now. Maybe back then it was. And she was a very religious woman. Had a lot of religious relics around the home, crucifixes, pictures of Mary and Jesus. So she's a very religious woman. But I guess Ed had gone to the house by himself that day. Because he got a call from this woman, and she said, "Ed, please, can you come over? I need your help." And she sounded in distress. So he said he rushed over there, and the front door was ajar a little bit, and he was calling out her name. She's like, "I'm in here. I'm in the back. I'm in the bedroom." So he goes in. He walks up to the bedroom door, and he looks in. And I remember him telling me this. He said he could see her laying in the bed facing the other way, so her back was to him, and she had the covers pulled up, and I won't say her name, but I'll say her name was Mary. And he said, "Mary, I'm here. What's up? What's the matter? What's the matter?" And all of a sudden, he said the covers fell right on the bed. She disappeared. And Ed's like, he said he was at that point. He goes, "Uh-oh, I knew something was up. That's not good."
No.
So he said he left the house in a hurry. He says as he was going through the living room, he said all the pillows on the couch come flying at him.
Oh, wow.
So a couple hours later, I get a call. He's like, "I want you to get all your equipment. I want you to go to this house tonight, camp out there, set up your monitors, set up your video equipment, your audio equipment, try to capture some evidence." So he said, I'm going to call Brian too. There's another guy. So we never send people out alone.
No.
Now, have I gone on cases alone? Yes. So, full disclosure there. I don't want to sound hypocritical, but anyway, so I called Brian and I said, "All right, I'll meet you there at 8:00. I get there and I was running a little late. I don't know, due to traffic. I was probably about 15, 20 minutes late. And I pull into this driveway. As I remember, it was like a semicircle, and Brian he's outside with another gentleman I had never met, and Brian had worked for a local not a news station, a local access TV programming station, so he had access to a lot more equipment than I had, but I brought mine. And I get out of the car, I'm looking at him, and he looks nervous, and I said, "Brian," I'm like, "why didn't you go in and start setting up?" He looks at me, he goes, you don't understand, Joe." He goes, "I wasn't going in the house until you got here."
Oh, man.
And I'm like, Ed used to call him the chickenologist. I'm like,
the chickenologist.
I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "You guys could have had this stuff set up." And then I didn't know you were bringing someone with you. And actually, Ed got upset later on because he didn't authorize for this other guy. But it was a friend of his from work that was helping him with the equipment. So we went in, we set up, and went through the house and did our investigation. I don't remember if we actually got anything. We did smell some foul smells. I wouldn't say it was like rotting flesh, but very bad smells that seemed to be emanating from the basement. And so, guess who? I went down the basement by myself because I was very apprehensive, and I respect the power of these things, but I'm not afraid to go down there. So I went down into the basement, and you could see this foul odor. It seemed to move around, like wherever you went in the house, that smell was with you. And a couple of the pictures on the wall, there was one of Mary, Mother Mary, that was turned around. And crucifixes would be like knocked off the wall. I mean, I didn't watch them fly off the wall, but they'd be on the ground, and the nail would still be in place, that whatever was holding it. And I'm saying to myself, how could this happen? I mean, I know how it could happen now, but back then I think I might have been in my early 20s. So that was a fascinating case. I'm going from memory. Because I remember Ed said to me, he goes, this case is pretty bad. We may be able to write a book about this one.
To the second encounter a year later at a place at the foothills of a place called Mount Barney, which is even further out, really remote. Great for bushwalking. It's on the backside of the national park. And we didn't know this at the time. There was tons of sightings in that area. Phenomenal. And we were, again, a year later, we were out there at a friend had a job. He was the manager of the pastoral lease that existed within the national park there. And he had a house, and we had the telescope set up and everything. And we're about 2:30 in the morning. It started raining. So we all decided to call it a night. And they made me sleep in the car because I snored. So they made me sleep in the car.
So do I.
And so I'm asleep, and I suddenly start, hearing this something walking around the car. I hear something growling. I look up, and I feel like I can't see anything, but I look up in the car, and I can feel that there's something sort of pushing against the car. And I thought it was my friends. I yell a few expletives and kick the doors, and thinking it's them, trying to get them to leave me alone because I was 3/4 asleep. And then I'm only giving you the quick version. And next thing I know, the car starts rocking. This thing, whatever it is pushing the car with a great deal of force. And my little, Toyota Nissan Bluebird at the time, pushing me from side to side. And it threw me around where I ended up with a busted shoulder and a cut eye. And it was growling, it was roaring. And I could actually hear the pressure of it on the roof of the car, and it popped the bonnet a bit. And when we saw the result of it in daylight, it just looked like two big elbow impressions in the roof of the car. So what happened was this thing was getting quite out of control. Then I saw a light come on outside from the house, and I could hear a friend of mine yelling out saying, "Leave him alone, leave him alone." And then they had the high-powered spotlight, and they shone it on this thing, and they said that if we had bears in Australia, they'd look like a gigantic 8-foot grizzly bear. That's what they sort of looked like to them. And then it stopped and it roared at them. And I could hear the roar because I was inside the car. And it roared at them. And then it just casually stepped over like a 4-foot high fence and just ran off back into the hills. But at that time, it was raining really, really heavy. And when we got dawn and daylight, we saw the damage to the car, but we could see a set of really, really big prints in the ground where it had dug in, pushing the car. So those were the two incidents. Those were the two real big incidences that I said, okay, well, when my kids are older and we're a little bit more settled, we'll really dive heavily into it. And, a lot of in southeast Queensland, a lot of the Yowie sightings and where they've been seen have been in areas where they where it's a high level of camping and fishing, right? Where there's a lot of day tourists, a lot of 4-wheel driving, but yet there's areas where it's still remote enough for these creatures to exist, and they scavenge also off the campers. A lot of I've come across in the middle of the bush, in the middle of nowhere, big garbage bags full of stuff that's just been strewn out, and looking for food. And we're talking 1 or 2 kilometers from the campground, right? And so we find the ones in high use public areas to be a lot more, a lot more relaxed. They tend to be like, oh yeah, there goes another human. So I'm staying here. I'm not getting out of the tree. I'm just just another person. But then we found the ones in the remote areas where they don't have a lot of contact with people as being far more aggressive, far more forthright. But then we also changes it. Both areas change at nighttime. So at nighttime they change personality again. It's like they become emboldened. They know that they can see through at night, and they know we can't. They know they own the night, and that gives them an advantage, and I think that's an adaptation that they've gotten over thousands of years, where they're, back in those primordial times when, there was nothing but conflict and a battle to survive. I think it's an adaptation that they've made. but they can definitely see, because they've got much bigger eyes, they can allow more light in. They've probably got more rods where they can allow the light in and see more. They definitely have the advantage over us, and they become more emboldened. That's when they start coming close to campsites and houses. That's when they start going through bins, and they just even stand next to people, and people don't even realize it. There was an example one time. We were at this location. I was with my son, who was 17 at the time, and two other friends. And one friend had a bionic ear on. Another one had a flare searching the river. I was standing behind one of my friends, and my son was standing behind me. And my son is 6'7".
Oh.
Okay, I'm 6'4". And my son's 6'7". And it's so dark there, you cannot see in front. You couldn't even see your hand. That's how dark it is. And he said, and I hear him saying, "Stop it, stop it." And I say to him, "What's wrong?" He goes, "Will you stop it?" And I said, "Stop doing what?" And he goes, "You're breathing and wheezing down my neck." And I said, "Mate, I'm in front of you."
Ooh. I just got goosebumps then.
Yeah, he just stepped forward right towards me, grabbed my arm, said, "Okay, let's go." I said, "No,
Yeah.
we're good." Then we heard something. Then as he stepped forward, we heard something run off from behind him. So something had snuck up on him.
So they could actually get in that close without you even knowing it.
They go.
There's right, and I can't be out like in the public face, saying that I'm the leader of this paranormal group and then go to court the next day, to testify on something, because they would mock it, poke holes in it, make fun of it. So I've always had the interest, but it wasn't until I left for a number of reasons. It just wasn't what I expected. And I didn't leave to start TV. I never thought that I'd be in TV. I actually looked at going back to law school. There were other agencies that had offered me conditional jobs or conditional offers of employment. But then the budget came in, and here in the U.S., the federal government's always trying to develop their budget and whatever. So I was left thinking, should I go back to school or not? And all of a sudden, this TV show presented itself, and I'd not, like I said, I dabbled in it. I'm not an actor or anything like that, and it was like they were looking for a paranormal group, which I had, friends, and we would go do stuff and investigate houses that people would, call us up on. You didn't have a website or a name or anything though. So when I told the casting director about this, they loved us. They just brought us in and everything, and then they sat us down, and I remember it was over at Paramount Studios, is where this production company was. We needed the big studio lot into the office. And they're like, "Okay, well, the network is gonna love you guys, but what do you think the show should be about?" And I was like, "What?" You normally have like
an idea,
concept first, right? And then you go and get your cast. So it was weird, but we were able to help build Fact Faked from the ground level, and it's always been sort of it's been a hobby. I mean, it's been, if things work out, because as you know, unless you're consistently writing books, and even then it'd be very, or on TV shows, you can't pay the bill.
Yeah.
Investigating the paranormal and UFOs, and so it has to be a passion and a hobby that you kind of keep on the side, and that's what it is. And so anyways, to answer your question, I didn't leave because I wanted to go do this. It found me, and not anything against the others that are doing TV shows. A lot of those, as you probably know, are primarily cast because you have people who want to be actors.
Yeah.
And they don't really care what it's in. They have some interest in, like, oh, paranormal, okay, great. And if they're good at it, they learn along the way, and then they become those
experts.
People who, experts. They don't like that word, but
no,
they can speak on the top. They do have a lot of experience, a couple years in, but mine was the opposite.